Hello, this is Mario from Bedales Wines. At Bedales we work with wine. Wine is our core business and our passion. We have made it our life's work and have made it in such a way to enjoy it, to share it and to help others to enjoy it to the full. And our Borough Market branch is a testament to this attempt and is certainly a place where wine is shared and enjoyed every day. However, we know that wine can be intimidating, and we know that in front of the hundreds of bottles of wine that are on our shelves, guests can be intimidated. But a little piece of our mission is to scratch this feeling out, and we hope that this video will help. Lots of the great things in life can be intimidating. Wine, art, literature, music, even love can be intimidating. And every time that we think that we are not good enough to enjoy those things, that we do not know enough to understand them, we're missing on something beautiful. After all, a wine, no matter how expensive or exclusive it is an agricultural product. It's an agricultural product that is meant to be enjoyed and shared with pleasure. It's a simple and precious conviviality boost. With this approach in mind and a little bit of curiosity, no wine can ever be intimidating. And all the wine shops, the wine bar, every single bottle of wine that we have on our shelves is an invitation to explore, an opportunity to get some joy. Better not to miss it. In this video, we will focus on the art and joy of wine tasting. The only two things that you need are a little bit of curiosity and your senses. If you're still watching, well, you got the curiosity for sure. Appreciation of wine grows with experience, but it benefits from a good and neat approach to tasting. So, get your eyes, nose and palate ready, and let's see what Dory and Alice can tell us about the art of wine tasting.
Okay, before we taste any wine, it's first important that we get a good look at it. The best way to look at wine, I always think, is at a 45-degree angle over something white. So a dinner plate or a piece of card should be great. But what are we looking for? First of all, is it still or is it sparkling? If it's sparkling, are the bubbles coarse or are they fine? Is it clear or cloudy? Cloudiness can sometimes be the sign of a fault, but not necessarily always. And then before describing the color itself, I like to try and describe the intensity of the color. And by intensity of color, what I mean is how saturated is the liquid itself with color. So while you're tilting it there at a 45-degree angle, how far does the color extend towards the edge of the liquid? Now we can try and describe the color itself. With white wine, I think it's useful to work on a scale of anywhere from pale lemon green right through to a kind of rich golden brown color. With red wine, we start a sort of candy pink and go all the way through to the more purple, more maroon side of the spectrum. And then there's viscosity. How thick, how heavy does the wine look in the glass? But what does all of this mean? If your wine has a deep, intense color and looks weighty in the glass, it could be that you're dealing with a full-bodied and rich wine, whereas something pale and light is possibly less extracted and more delicate. Oak aging will often add color and intensity to the wines. This is particularly evident with white wine, which may become straw or golden colored after time. And finally, bottle age. As white wine ages, it gains color. As red wine ages, it loses color. So with an old red wine, you may see some evidence of what we call bricking, which is the formation of a sort of garnety, orangey brown color around the rim. But of course, there are exceptions to all the above rules. So unfortunately, we're going to have to both smell and taste the wine before we jump to any conclusions about it. Okay, so now we move on to the nose, which is arguably the most important element of wine tasting, because our sense of smell has such a profound effect on the way that our brain processes flavor. We're going to start off by giving the wine a swirl around. Swirling will help to release the volatile compounds in the wine, which cause us to perceive aroma. Now, is it clean? Are there any signs of a fault? Cork taint is probably the most common of these and usually has an unpleasant damp cardboard smell. Second of all, intensity. How intense is the wine? Does it really leap out of the glass at you, or are its aromas more subtle, more precise? And now most importantly, what are we smelling? Grapes are unique in that once we put them through the fermentation process, they're capable of producing a hugely diverse range of aromas. I find it helpful to break these aromas up into 3 categories. These categories form the 3 different grey sections at the centre of your colour wheel. Number 1, primary. So primary characteristics we tend to say come from the fruit itself and are influenced only by conditions in the vineyard. They include, but aren't limited to, fruit, flowers, herbaceous and herbal qualities. This is where the unique characteristics of individual grape varieties would usually reveal themselves to us. If we're smelling fruit, it's important to consider the nature of that fruit. For instance, if we're smelling apples, are we smelling crisp green apple, ripe red apple, or even baked or overripe apple? Being able to spot these differences may give you important clues into how ripe the fruit was when it was picked, and therefore perhaps into where in the world it was grown. Secondary come from the vinification process. So these are decisions that the winemaker has made in the winery. The most important of which is probably oak aging. With oaked wines, we would expect to smell vanilla, sweet spice characteristics, and often woody or smoky smells. Now finally, tertiary. With tertiary, the aromas are dominated by savoury characteristics and are influenced by bottle age. This is where things can get really interesting, with aromas such as smoked meat, mushroom, forest floor, sometimes even farmyard. Anyway, that's enough from me. I should think by now you'll all be ready to taste.
All right, now we're going into the fun bit of wine tasting, which is the actual tasting of the wine. To make sure you get the clearest possible impression of the wine, take a small sip, then draw some air through your lips. This will ensure that the wine coats the entirety of your mouth and that the vapors travel to the back of your nose, where your sense of smell will detect the flavors. Whilst you're doing that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the things to look out for on the palate as you're tasting the wine. Those things are going to be flavor intensity, acidity, sweetness, alcohol, tannin, the overall body, and the finish of the wine. The first things I want to mention is the difference between the nose and the palate, and then flavor intensity. Generally, what you taste on the palate should match what you smell in the glass, but that's not necessarily always the case. The warming of the wine in your mouth can make some characteristics of the wine more apparent on the palate than they appear on the nose. For example, earthy, spicy, toasty flavors will become much more apparent on the palate, whilst fruity and floral flavors are less prominent on the palate than they are in the nose. So you're not always going to get the same things in your mouth as you get smelling the wine. Now, flavor intensity. What do we mean by flavor intensity? We just mean how much can you actually taste? If the flavors are very faint and general, for example, you can taste red berries, but you can't discern if it's strawberries, raspberries, or cherries, then we'd consider that wine light in intensity. But if the flavors just seem to jump out and make themselves well known, you can clearly discern what it is, then we'd call that wine high in intensity. The next thing I want to mention is sweetness. Sweetness is just the taste of sugars that are present in a wine. During fermentation, if the yeast doesn't eat all of the sugars, we're left with what's called residual sugar. A wine with a certain level of residual sugar in it is what's considered a sweet wine, but they can vary in sweetness in a range of styles, whilst a wine with little to no residual sugar is what we would perceive as a dry wine. Sweetness is usually tasted at the tip of the tongue, but if the levels of sugars are too high and the acidity is too low, then the wine can taste oversweet or cloying. But if there's too little sugar, then the acidity is unmoderated. This can both work with or against the wine, just depending on the style. Sweetness can also add to the viscosity or the fuller mouthfeel of the wine, adding to the body of it. But also remember, you can't smell sweetness, so the only way to look for it is with your tongue. The next thing I want to talk about is alcohol. Alcohol is the main product of fermentation, and it's what gives wines its essence. It's what makes wine wine. Alcohol works as a natural preservative in the wine. It helps spread the flavors around your mouth. It helps prolonging the flavors on the finish, which I'll get more into later. But what alcohol mainly does for wine is add to the body of it. Because alcohol brings this heat and this viscosity. So if the levels of alcohol are too low, the wine can seem watery or dull, unless there's another component such as sugar to give it body. If the levels of alcohol are high, then it can seem as if the wine has a lot of weight in your mouth. But if the levels are too high, then they can trigger the pain receptors in your mouth, so it feels like there's a burning sensation, especially after you swallow the wine. A good way to gauge alcohol levels is just have a sip and take notice of the warming sensation on the back of your throat as you swallow. If it's really warm, then the wine is probably high in alcohol. If you don't really notice it, it's most likely lower levels of alcohol. The next thing I want to mention are tannins. Tannins are an important factor in wine as they work as a natural preservative, they're antiseptic, and they add to the body and texture of wine. Tannins are mostly found in red wine, and they're extracted from the skins and pips of the grape during the maceration and the fermentation, where those skins and pips are in contact with the grape juice. They can also be extracted from oak, from aging wine in oak barrels. Thick-skinned grape varieties such as Cabernet Sauvignon will have more tannin than thin-skinned grape varieties such as Pinot Noir. Now, tannin are a textural element of wine, so they bind to the protein in your saliva and leave us with this mouth-drying sensation. So they don't impart a lot of flavor, except that the tannin are unripe and there's slight bitterness, but it's all about texture. Food pairing is very important when it comes to tannic wines, and this is where the saying red wine with red meat and white wine with fish comes in, because the tannin will also bind to the protein in the meat, thus softening the impact of the wine and giving it a more smoother, rounder mouthfeel. If the wine is too tannic or the tannin are unripe, it can be astringent, and young wines with a lot of tannin often need to age a bit, as over time those bitter tannins will smooth out and be more mellow. A good method of gauging how tannic a wine is to just take a sip, treat it like mouthwash, get it over your gums, and notice how drying it is. Also notice if it's pleasant and smooth or if they're astringent and harsh. Next thing I'm going to mention is the body of the wine. What is the body? It's just the overall texture of the wine. It's not a singular component, but it's the overall impression of all the things that make up the structure of the wine. Alcohol is the main component. Sugar can add body with its viscosity, whilst acidity can make a wine feel lighter in body. High levels of ripe tannin can make a wine seem full-bodied, whilst low levels of astringent tannin can make the wine seem thinner, thus lighter in body. For some wines, judging the body is pretty straightforward. If a wine is high in alcohol, has a lot of ripe tannins and concentrated flavors, it's clearly going to be high in body. But if a wine has low alcohol and is high in acidity, it's clearly going to be light body. Now, the last thing to look out for on the palate as we're tasting wine is the length of the wine. What we mean by the length is just how long the flavors stay in your mouth after you swallow the sip of wine. And we're not talking about the feel of astringency from tannin or acidity on the palate after. We're just talking flavor characteristics. How long do the flavors stay? A short length wine will stick with you for a few seconds, but a deeply concentrated, well-made wine can stay with you for long over a minute. Now, as you swallow, just make a mental note of how long the flavors stay around, and that's how you discern the length of the wine. Thank you for watching, and enjoy tasting the wine.
Well, once you've tasted your wine, it's time to draw the conclusions. Ultimately, the overall evaluation of a wine is a matter of personal taste and subjective judgment. Rating wines is always going to be controversial, but we can try to apply a 5-star rating system to help us to maintain a consistent approach with all the wines that we taste. The 4 properties that we consider to be crucial to determine the quality of a wine are balance, length, intensity, and complexity, also known as the Blick method: balance, length, intensity, and complexity. So our scoring system starts with 1 star that we will give to all the wine that we taste. A 2nd star is given if we think that the wine had a good balance. A 3rd star is given for length, 4th star intensity, and 5 star if the wine is also complex. A balanced wine is a wine where tannins, acid, alcohol, and flavors are harmoniously balanced, and they act like the voices of a choir. They all contribute to the music, but no one dramatically takes over the other. So what we're looking is balance between acidity, tannin, alcohol, flavors, and aromas. Let's take acidity, for example. When a very, very high acidity is not balanced by adequate residual sugar or flavors, then the wine will taste harsh and aggressive. In contrast, a wine with a very low acidity that has also high alcohol and perhaps high residual sugar will taste weak and flabby. So, if you think that the wine that you just had is a balanced wine, so that none of those elements that we have here is out of place and is destroying the harmony, give the wine a star. Length refers to how long the pleasant sensations linger after the wine has been swallowed. In short, the longer, the better. But remember, we're only referring to the pleasant sensations. If you're left with an unpleasant burning sensation from the excess of alcohol in the wine, then that's not good. So you would add a star if you think that the wine that you tasted and purchased has enough length. The intensity of aromas and flavor is another important property of a wine. A wine with weak, dilute, and unidentifiable flavors characteristics is seldom a good wine. But beyond a certain level, more intensity does not necessarily mean better quality. What we want are flavors that are identifiable, well-defined, and in line with the style of wine that we are drinking. And we need to bear this in mind for the more delicate wines. So if you think that the flavors that you discovered in your wine are identifiable, well-defined, and so are the aromas, well, give the wine a star. Complex flavors and aromas are desirable features in many wines. The complexity can come from the primary aromas and flavors alone, or it may come from the combination of these with secondary and tertiary characteristics. However, the lack of a range of different flavors is not always a negative. And not all premium wines are incredibly complex. In these instances, purity and definition are what makes a wine great. So purity is something that we need always to consider when we assess the complexity of a wine. There are some fantastic Pinot Noirs that might not have lots of different flavors, but they deliver what they are supposed to with purity and concentration. Therefore, in this case, the wine goes with a star. So a poor wine at the end will end up only with 1 star, making us quite unhappy. A wine with 2 stars, well, is something that most of us would consider acceptable. 3 star, and you start dealing with good wines. 4 stars, you're happier. Outstanding wines are wines that, with 5 stars, means that they have balance, length, intensity, and complexity. Well, I hope you find that interesting. Thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you in branch. In the while, you can visit our website to read our latest news and access our web shop, where we list hundreds and hundreds of fantastic wines that we can deliver nationally.